And it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Donovan Campbell is a decorated military officer and a young Fortune 500 executive whose lessons about leadership and teamwork came the hard way through 3 combat deployments, 2 in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. Donovan has over a decade of experience leading teams in some of the most demanding environments imaginable, both on and off the battlefield, and he is passionate about bringing a focus on building individual character into the workplace. He was awarded the Combat Action Ribbon and a Bronze Star with Valor for his time in Iraq. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller Joker 1, a Marine platoon story of courage, leadership, and brotherhood, which Bing West has called the finest small unit description of a platoon at war in Iraq, and if that's what Bing West says, that says it all, and which Entertainment Weekly has said, it isn't as much a story of war as it is a story of love. It was also recently named one of the best military books of the decade by Military Times. Campbell grew up in Dallas, Texas, as the oldest of 5 brothers. He graduated with honors from Princeton University and Harvard Business School and finished first in his class in the Marines Basic Officer course. In his senior year of college, he says, "I decided that I had been afforded opportunities that most Americans hadn't had, and that I therefore owed more to my country than perhaps others did." Upon graduation, he was appointed a 2nd lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps, eventually commanding the platoon known by the radio call sign Joker 1. Campbell led his men through some of the bloodiest battles of the war in Iraq, holding them together with determination, their love for one another, and their faith in God and their fellow soldiers. After his combat tours, Campbell returned to Dallas, where he lives with his wife and 4 children, ages 8 years down to 9 weeks. And became the last one didn't even make the bio. I had to add that, so I don't know if he realizes he became a recognizable face among the military officers returning home and entering the business world. In his most recent book, The Leader's Code, Mission, Character, Service, and Getting the Job Done, he applies the principles learned in the military, which are a humble servant leader mentality, a willingness to shoulder responsibility, and an understanding of personal sacrifice for the greater good for civilian life. Donovan Campbell's lecture appearances include Harvard Business School, the Air Force Academy, Wake Forest, and now Regent University, which he will treasure the most, PepsiCo, and Culver's Restaurants. He is a multiple times guest with the Barbara Bush Celebration of Reading as a featured author. We honor his service, and we are grateful to hear from Donovan Campbell today.
Well, it's certainly a kinder introduction than I deserve. Although the reason my son did not make the list was because he hasn't earned his place in the family yet. I keep telling him, look, you got to step up to the plate before you can make the bio. But, 9 weeks, that's a lot of time. You would think you would have done more in that time. But first off, I really want to thank Regent University for allowing me to be here. It's a real privilege to be able to talk about something near and dear to my heart on Veterans Day or on a day very near Veterans Day. And I want to also thank Regent for your support of the military. I know so many folks who have gotten their degree through Regent University. It is a delight to see the military, so many military members represented here today, and there are not a lot of places that would do that. So please, from me to you, thank you. Thanks to all the military members who are here as well. I really cannot thank you enough for your service, present and past. For those of you who are not Marines, it's not too late. Just saying. So today I'm going to talk a bit about leadership, specifically the concept of servant leadership. For me, it's near and dear to my heart, and I think it's pretty relevant. It seems that leadership is in the news day in and day out, and unfortunately, it's almost never a story of good leadership. And you could argue that our country is in a crisis of leadership. Trust in our national institutions has never been lower. Over 60% now trust our political and business leaders. Many people view them as simply in life for themselves. And the sad thing is, even as trust erodes, I think good leadership could not be more needed, whether that's domestically or internationally. On the domestic front, we are begging for people to break the gridlock that seems to paralyze us at a national level. I think internationally, you have emerging nations who are looking at the way in which America governs and leads itself and finding themselves at a crossroad, whether to adopt a model that is more democratic or to adopt a model that is different, because our democracy doesn't seem to work. I think in our homes, in our communities, we are still feeling the effects of the Great Recession, and you could not, there is not a time that is better for people to stand up and say, I would like to help, I would like to make a difference, I have been blessed, and I would like to give back. So I think it's extremely relevant, and I'm honored to talk about it today. Before I get started, in the spirit of transparency, I thought I'd just tell you how my first book and then second book came to be, because I am an example of succeeding with absolutely no intent. I'm an accidental author. When I never meant to write a book. When my brothers heard I wrote a book, they said, well, when did you learn to read? It's like, all right, thanks. So the way the first book came to be was this. I was in business school. It was my second year, and I had transitioned from fighting house to house in Ramadi to business school in under 9 months. So I spent the first year just getting my legs underneath me. We had moved to Boston, and I'd had a child, so it was a lot of life change. And I spent that first year just sort of processing. And then in the second year, I realized that I had really made a mistake, because I had failed to write my men up for enough awards. Because what I didn't realize, take that water, was that my men had done something unique, not just in the context of America, but in the context of the military. They had seen some of the worst fighting and suffered some of the most horrific casualties that anyone had suffered since Vietnam, and I didn't recognize them for it, because when a 19-year-old charges a machine gun and he fully expects to die, but he does so that he can rescue his comrades from fire, or a 20-year-old naval corpsman runs out into fire and he's waving his arms and screaming, shoot at me, so that the wounded Marine at his feet can be evacuated, there's not a lot that you can do for those guys to say thank you. You can't give them a day off. You can't give them a raise. You can't give them a promotion. You can't give them an extended vacation. The only thing that you can do to say thank you is you can take a little bit of ribbon, wrap it around a little bit of metal, and you pin it to their chest, and you say, well done. I cannot thank you enough for risking your life so that others may live. And I did not do enough of that. And so my second year of business school, I went to my professor and I said, look, sir, I did not do this for my men, and my men aren't telling their families what they've done. And what they've done is amazing. So I would just like permission to try to make it up to them and write down their story for them, so that they can then go to their wives, their fiancés, their mothers, their fathers, their brothers and sisters and say, look, I don't talk about what I did, but my lieutenant wrote it down for me. So you can be proud of what I did overseas, and you can know what I did overseas. And about halfway through, my professor said, look, you should try to publish this. And okay. So one thing led to another, and a book was born. So let me tell you a little bit about, I guess I should say, the hardest context in which I was taught leadership, and then share with you, if you don't mind, a few of the lessons that I learned from it. So in 2003, fall of 2003, I was given command of a Marine Corps infantry platoon, whom you see up here, whose radio call sign was Joker 1. And with 4 exceptions, every one of my men was between the ages of 18 and 21. They were college age. We thought in 2003 that the war in Iraq was over. So my men and I trained for a fairly hazy mission. But in early 2004, it became apparent that there was in fact combat left, and that Joker 1 and I would be headed back to Iraq to participate in that. So in February 2004, we deployed to the volatile Anbar province, which would become the heart of the Sunni insurgency. In fact, we were deployed in some ways to the heart of the insurgency, because we were deployed to the capital city of the Anbar province, Ramadi. When we went over, we thought we'd do a lot more rebuilding than fighting, but we could not have been more wrong. As the spring and summer of 2004 wound on, my company of 160 men found itself battling in a city of, conservatively, 400,000 people. We never rested. We never had a single day off. We were on the front lines continually. Throughout most of that summer, my unit was the most attacked unit in all of Iraq, and my company was the most attacked company in all of Iraq. By the time we came home, a third of my battalion had been wounded, just over a third of my platoon had been wounded, half of my company had been wounded, and my sister company, Echo, had lost 22, meaning they had been decimated twice over. To this day, we're told it is one of the highest, if not the highest, casualty rates that any battalion has suffered, Marine or Army, since Vietnam. So I got back from war in October 2004, and by August 2005, I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, preparing for year one of business school. And then shortly before I graduated business school, I was involuntarily recalled, and I did a third tour with the U.S. Special Forces in Afghanistan. So I missed yet another wedding anniversary, and I missed my first daughter's second year of life. So I spent my 20s at war, basically. And that decade was not easy, but I think it was a really, really good one for me. Because in spite of the difficulties, for me, the war experiences were transformative ones for the better. Now that I've spent some time in business, I've learned that the fundamental leadership principles that were taught by the Marine Corps are just as necessary, in fact, probably more so in peace than they are in war. But they're wildly misunderstood. I remember in business school, my compatriots coming to me and saying, you know, we understand that you led in combat, but you just need to know that the way that the military leads just won't be effective in the business world. I remember thinking, really? Because in '09, I'm watching our financial system implode, and I'm watching leader after leader raise their hand and say, look, I don't know anything about this. You can't hold me responsible. I'd like my golden parachute, and I'm going to leave my organization in shambles. And I thought, you know, I had this 19-year-old. His name was Corporal Teague, and he had 3 men who followed him. And we had to do this mission every 4th day, and it sucked. It was not a fun mission. And it was to walk down the middle of the road that ran through Ramadi, looking for bombs with our naked eye. It's called a route sweep. And so we all took turns doing this, the 4 platoons and I. And every time you found a bomb, it was about 4 or 5 feet away from you because it was so well camouflaged. So Corporal Teague led the point fire team that led my entire platoon in that mission. And Corporal Teague took the point position in front of his men on every one of those missions. And I thought, one day I went up to Teague and I was like, look, Teague, you're probably not in the most effective position because if we get hit, you need to be behind their men to direct their fires. And he looked at me and said, look, sir, eventually one of these bombs is going to go off. It's just a matter of time. You and I both know this. And when it goes off, I want my body to be in between that bomb and my men so that I can hopefully save them when that happens. And I thought, but that's leadership. And that works. And it works in all contexts, and more people need to know about it. So that was how the second book came to be. And the fundamental principle in the book, and the fundamental principle that the Corps taught us was this: to be an effective leader, you have to have excellent character, and that you have to build your character. Character comes before competence, and to build character, you have to pursue virtue with the same intentionality with which you pursue everything else in life that you want to be good at. If you want to run a marathon, you construct a plan, you execute the plan, and then you go run the race. It's no different with building your character. And typical of the Marine Corps, they told us exactly which virtues we needed to pursue. And they're true, and they're right, and they work. And I'd like to share a few of them with you now. The first virtue is humility. You see Abraham Lincoln up here. Next to him is his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. I think Lincoln is one of the most effective presidents we've ever had, and he was known for his humility. Many of you, thank you, may not realize this, but he built one of the most effective leadership teams from a group of people who had hotly contested him for the Republican nomination. And one of his most fierce contestants was his future Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. He was one of the most disappointed not to receive the nomination, and prior to serving as Lincoln's Secretary of War, he had encountered him 6 years earlier. They were fellow lawyers on a joint case in Ohio, and Lincoln asked Stanton to walk to lunch with him, and Stanton refused him. And he later told a friend he did not want to walk to lunch with a long-armed ape. If you fast forward 6 years, now the ape is his commander-in-chief, and he's his Secretary of War, and he resents it. And so the story goes that a congressperson came from Stanton's office into Lincoln's office, and he said, "Mr. President, you may not be aware of this, but the Secretary of War has just called you a damn fool." And he said, "Really?" He said, "Yes, sir," and then he repeated it. And then Lincoln said, "Well, if Stanton says I was a damn fool, then a damn fool I must be, because he generally says what he means, and he is generally right. I'm going to go step over and see him." And I think that is an excellent example of humility. Someone who is willing to put aside his own insecurities, his own past issues, his own hurts, and really focus on truth and on bringing out the best in a team so that he could focus on healing the wounds and leading his nation through the greatest crisis arguably in our history. And I think this virtue is often misunderstood. Many people think of it as self-effacement or lack of confidence, and so it's acquired a bit of a negative connotation as it relates to leadership, but nothing could be farther from the truth. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is simply thinking of yourself less. It is having the most accurate view of ourselves possible and being unafraid to transmit that view as accurately and transparently as possible to those around us. I think a great example of transmitting ourselves accurately is Oliver Cromwell. And he was the English general that in the 17th century led the English forces that overthrew the monarchy and established a parliamentary democracy. He was the most powerful man of his generation, perhaps the most powerful man of the century in his country. And in 1654, he sat for a painting. And the painter painted him as an idealized Roman god. He knew he was painting the most important man of the time, and he didn't want to screw it up. And Oliver Cromwell took one look at it, and he demanded that it be redone because he had noticeable facial warts, and they were missing. And he told that painter, "You will paint me just as I am, warts and all, or I will not pay a farthing for it." And that's how that phrase has entered our modern lexicon. And I think, again, that is humility. I know who I am, warts and all. And I am unafraid for others to know me as I am, warts and all. One of the things that the Corps told us to reinforce this virtue is that we had to seek out constructive criticism. We had to deliberately pursue people in our lives who would point out our flaws honestly, openly, and courageously and push us to be the best people that we could. So as you think about how you build humility into your own life, into your own leadership style, I would ask you, who are you pursuing that helps you be better? Do you deliberately seek out constructive criticism? How often do you say, "I screwed that up. Please forgive me"? Who in your life knows you as you truly are? The next virtue, unsurprisingly, that the Marines taught us was discipline. And most of us associate this word with the word punishment, and so it, again, has a negative connotation, but it wasn't always so. In fact, the word discipline originates from the Latin discipula, which means teaching or learning. And in the 13th century, it entered Middle English as a systematic code of instruction that was used for pupils to train them in a craft or teach them to follow a particular code of conduct. So in the context of leadership, the virtue of discipline, we were taught, is the virtue that keeps the leader on the straight and narrow and that helps them adhere to the written and unwritten standards of behavior and morality that they expect of their teams. I think a great example of discipline is legendary polar explorer Ernest Shackleton. It's his ship that you see up here. On August 8th, 1914, he and 56 others left British water to attempt the most heroic feat of Antarctic exploration still left, which was to cross the South Pole on foot. Rumor has it, he put an ad in the paper that said, "Men wanted for hazardous journey, low pay, continuous darkness, probability of return uncertain." I've put similar advertisements out for my team. It hasn't worked. No one has showed up. But apparently his expedition was oversubscribed. Misfortune followed them, though. On January 1915, his ship, the Endurance, which you see here, found itself frozen into an ice pack on the Antarctic Weddell Sea. His men abandoned the ship for the ice, and they slept in overcrowded tents, either in reindeer skin sleeping bags or sometimes directly on the ship itself. The ship eventually sank. They lost many of their supplies, so they had to ration what was left. Every man took his turn serving every other man their food. Every man ate the same amount of food with the same 3 utensils, an aluminum mug, a knife, and their fingers. Every man stood 4-hour watches because the ice could break up and reform unexpectedly, so you had to be alert so that you did not fall into an ice crack when it was breaking up. Every now and again they had to move camp because of the repeated cracks in the ice, and when that time came, every man harnessed themselves to a sled and pulled for miles until they could reach a point of safety. And every single thing that his men did, Shackleton did right alongside with them. He stood watch in 4-hour intervals just as they did. He took his turn to serve his men out of the same pot that they served him. He harnessed himself into the sled and pulled right alongside his men. And as a result, every single one of his men was rescued after nearly a year stranded in Antarctica. Shackleton is a great example of what I would call executional discipline, which is strict adherence to non-ethical organizational standards, rules, and expectation. It is what happens when a leader can raise their hand and say, listen, if you guys want to know what right looks like in the large and in the small, just watch me. I will not do anything that I will not ask you to do, or you will not do anything that I am not willing to do. You can be assured that in the smallest things and in the largest things, I will be consistent and I will model for you exactly what I expect. So when there are questions of what right is, you just look at me and I will do my best to model it for you. There's another discipline that we are taught, and that is ethical discipline. That's equally important for a leader, which is adherence to a basic moral code, i.e., I will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. Many of us will not have to navigate complex ethical decisions or life and death on a day in and day out basis, but all of us make choices that affect the livelihoods of those around us. And all of us make dozens of small ethical decisions every single day. And because they seem lower in magnitude, they can seem lesser in importance. For example, does it really matter if I tell my wife I'll be home at 6:30 for dinner when I realize that is a complete impossibility? Does it really matter that when I tell my oldest daughter I'll show up at her ballet recital when I know that that's just not going to happen? Does it matter when I tell my boss that I've almost finished that presentation and I haven't even started? Do my teams really notice it when I tell them that I'll be at their meeting and then don't show up? And the answer to all these questions is yeah. Yes, they absolutely notice it. Small decisions shape us. People notice the little ethical decisions that we make, and they shape our reputation and they shape our character. We were taught as Marines, you have to practice the way you want to play. You don't just show up on the battlefield and get it done. I remember opening a Humvee door 20 times just so I knew what would happen when my convoy got ambushed and I had to leap out of it, and it saved my life. It is no different with small ethical decisions. I promise you, Bernie Madoff did not wake up one day and say, you know what? I would love it if the whole world thought of my name synonymously with the word fraud and cheat. I would just love it if I could be marched to jail in an orange jumpsuit and really hang my head in shame for the rest of my life. Wouldn't that be awesome? I bet I can work hard to achieve that goal. No, by his own admission, he one day made one small decision to hide one small loss with the full intention of disclosing it later. But that one decision led to a series of poor, similar small decisions until he was running the largest Ponzi scheme in history. And the rest, as they say, is history. So as you think about your leadership, I ask you, think about, do you model the expectations that you ask others to have? Can you raise your hand and say, look, if you want to know what right looks like, here I am, look at me. Do you do what you say you're going to do? Do you say the hard truth when it's time? Or do you make easy promises? I know that is a hard standard and it is difficult for me to achieve, but it is necessary nonetheless. The next virtue that we were taught was a virtue of excellence. And much as it pains me to admit, this former Air Force officer and his son exhibit it as best as anything I've ever heard. So this is a picture of Dick and Rick Hoyt. Dick is pushing, his son is in the wheelchair. When he was 37, Dick entered a 5-mile charity race with his wheelchair-bound son. And he was, like many retired Air Force officers, flabby and out of shape. And he had no idea. I'm sorry. It's too hard not to. That said, he had no idea how he was going to finish the race. But he did finish. He finished it next to last. And for an hour afterwards, he lay on the ground, gasping for breath, convinced that his short and unhappy racing career was over. But while he was on the ground, his son Rick typed out this message with his head, because that's the only part of his body that he could move. It said, "Dad, when I am running, I don't even feel like I'm handicapped." And since that time, Dick and Rick have run over 300 endurance races. Because he could do something that his son could not, he determined that he would keep doing it, and he would do it to the best of his ability, no matter what the outcome. I cannot imagine training for a race that I know not only am I going to lose, but I'm not even going to do that well at because I'm pushing someone in a wheelchair. But he did it, and he gave it his all, and as a result, something amazing was born. He has been an inspiration to hundreds of thousands. I have met Marines who have lost legs who have pointed to this picture and said, "Look, if this guy can do a triathlon pushing his son in a wheelchair, I can get back on this leg and I can walk." He has been an inspiration to all. And I think that is an excellent example of the virtue of excellence. Giving your best simply because you have a day in which to give it. And having been to war and come back, I think I have a better understanding of the gift of time. I've lost a lot of friends overseas, and when many of your comrades don't have the gift of time, they don't have a tomorrow anymore, because they bled out all their days in a nameless street, in a nameless city that no one back here is ever going to know. You begin to value every day because you know that tomorrow is not assured. You begin to say things like, "My buddy Robo would have loved another day with his wife, but he's not going to get it because he was shot in the mouth in an ambush, and we moved his widow out when we came home." You tell yourself, "Quill's family would love one more week with him, but they won't get it. Neither will my buddy Shumney's 3 kids because he died in a helicopter crash. Neither will Boulding's or Winchester's, but I, however, still live. And if I still live, then what am I going to do with this day that I have been given? A day that so many of my friends would want but will no longer get. What will I do with this responsibility? How can I make sure that I can earn my time here and I make the most of something that so many wish for but will no longer have?" So I don't know how you live each day like it's your last, because I found that even when death is imminent, it's hard to conceptualize of what it's like to do, what it's like to die. But I do know this. With the days that I have, I can do what Dick Hoyt does. I can do my best at them, regardless of the outcome. I can pursue a task that I have in front of me with everything that I have in me, because every day that I have brings a responsibility to do that day, to live that day well. I can take the opportunities that are given me as responsibilities. I can understand that with every right comes a commensurate duty. And I can live in fear that at the end of days, I will stand before my Maker, and he will look at me and say, "With all of your gifts, with all of your skills, with all of your opportunities, with all of your talents, you have served primarily yourself. You have been weighed in the balance and found wanting." And I do not want to hear that. Instead, I want to hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You were given much, and you have returned even more." I hope that happens at the end of my days, because that will mean that I have pursued excellence. When we were in officer candidate school, we had to lie in our beds with our M16s on our chests, and this gunnery sergeant would march back and forth, and he would make us repeat this phrase. And it was 2000, and I had not been to war yet, so I was some clueless 20-year-old, and I didn't really get what he was saying. But now that I've been to war, it makes a lot more sense. And this is what he told us. He made us repeat after him, "Today I have given all that I have. That which I have kept, I have lost forever. And I don't want to lose things forever." The next virtue that we were told we needed to know as good officers, good leaders, was our mission. This is a picture of Albert Nobel. And he learned that he was pursuing a mission that he didn't even mean to be on the hard way. You see a phrase below his picture there. Albert Nobel woke up and read this phrase in the headlines of the Paris newspaper Le Monde one day. Albert Nobel was a Swedish chemist who was known for the invention of dynamite. And he and his brother built a manufacturing empire built on the manufacture of dynamite. So his brother was visiting one of their factories when the highly unstable factory exploded and it killed his brother. And Albert Nobel woke up in Paris the next morning, he picked up the paper, and he read his own obituary. And its headline was this, and its headline stated, "The merchant of death is dead." And he realized that that was how the world viewed him, as the merchant of death. That was not how he wanted to be viewed. That was not what he intended to be viewed at. He does not mean to be pursuing that particular mission, but pursue it he did. And most scholars believe that it was this incident that led him to donate the bulk of his fortune to the institution that would create the Nobel Prizes, among them the Nobel Prize for Peace. See, he learned the hard way that before you lead, you have got to know what you stand for, because people aren't going to follow someone who doesn't know where they're going. You need a mission that guides the course of your life, that shapes who you are and what you want to be known for. I can assure you that combat brings out the darkest recesses in the heart of man. And many times overseas, only knowing that I would rather die than dishonor my faith, my mission, or the core was the only thing that kept me sane. I am far from perfect, but I am a Christian, and so my mission is to bring great honor and credit to my faith through the nobility and power of my actions. I also carry the name of my Father, and He has given me a great name. And I hope and I pray that at the end of my days, I can hand to my son and my 3 daughters the same great name that was handed to me. That's my mission. I hope I can live up to it. But I encourage you, find what works for you. Because at the end of the days, when you are lowered into your tomb, it will not be your bank account that is written on your headstone. It will be something else. And I urge you to think, what is it that at the end of days you want to be known for? If you can have only one thing written on your tombstone, what is that? What is your mission? The final thing that we were taught in the Marines is that in the long run, there is only one leadership model that consistently inspires teams to give their best, and that is a servant leader model. This type of leadership is in high demand, but it's in short supply, because what I've found is that consistently subordinating my own self-interest or selfish desires is hard over time. Eventually, you want to stop doing that, and you want to focus on your own needs rather than the needs of your team. But at the same time, you sort of want to disguise that, because openly saying that, look, the thing I care most about is my paycheck or my position, just doesn't sound that popular. But I have learned the hard way that people intuit my values by exactly the sacrifices that I make to uphold them. And if I can't make small sacrifices for what I believe, for the welfare of my team, for my family, then everyone who looks at me will know that all that I'm doing is giving those things lip service, and my real values must lie elsewhere, and the trade-offs I make will reveal exactly what those are. So what do I mean by servant leadership? Simply put, this is the type of leadership that demands that a leader place their cause and their values first, the welfare of their team second, and their own personal interest and welfare a distant third. A leader should view themselves as existing to remove obstacles for their team so that their team can accomplish a worthy goal. A leader does not exist to accrue glory or power or wealth or fame, because you cannot take any of these with you. Naked we came into this world, and naked we leave it. I've learned that the hard way from going to all too many funerals. Servant leadership asks that people observe what we do rather than what we say. It demands integrity, wholeness, and consistency between word and deed. Above all else, it demands character. The final virtue that underpins all of this is courage. Allow me to tell a quick story about Corporal Jason Dunham. He was 23 years old when he participated in the Iraq invasion in 2003. He was scheduled to get out of the Marines shortly after returning. Returning home from Iraq, but when it became apparent that his 12-man infantry squad would deploy back to Iraq in 2004, he extended his enlistment to go with them. And reportedly, he told his mother that he could not stand the idea of his guys going back overseas without him there to protect him. So go back overseas, he did. And on April 14th, 2004, he and his men were patrolling when they came under fire. Heading south to cut off their ambushers, they came upon a 7-vehicle convoy exiting the scene. And the rest of what I'm going to tell you is directly from his citation for the Medal of Honor. And it is Dunham's picture that is up here right now. Corporal Dunham and his team stopped the vehicles to search them for weapons. As they approached the vehicles, an insurgent leapt out and attacked Corporal Dunham. Corporal Dunham wrestled the insurgent to the ground, and in the ensuing struggle saw the insurgent release a grenade. Corporal Dunham immediately alerted his fellow Marines to the threat. Aware of the imminent danger, and without hesitation, Corporal Dunham covered the grenade with his helmet and body, bearing the brunt of the explosion and shielding his Marines from the blast. In an ultimate and selfless act of bravery, in which he was mortally wounded, he saved the lives of at least 2 fellow Marines. Now, unlike Dunham, most of us are not going to be asked to give the last full measure of devotion for our causes or our people, but all of us are guaranteed to face hard moral choices in life, choices where it is easier to look the other way, to be silent when surrounded by yes men, or simply to lie when the truth is too painful. And so at those times, I think it's worth asking ourselves a question: do I want to be brave right now, or do I just want to avoid pain? But I think there is a phenomenal opportunity right now. I think that if we can demonstrate morality does not fluctuate with the bottom line, if we can demonstrate that we care more about the patient accumulation of virtue rather than the rapid accumulation of wealth, if we can lead by serving others, then I think now is the best time in living memory to be raising our hands and saying, do you need someone to stand in the gap? Do you need someone to help the helpless? Do you need someone to serve the weak? Do you need someone to lead the strong? Do you need someone to make a difference in your communities? Then here I am. Choose me. Because I think we have a once-in-a-lifetime chance to shape the course of this country and maybe even the course of the world. I think we have a once-in-a-lifetime chance to show a country hungry for good leadership that it does exist, that there are people out there who care, that are people out there who are willing to put their money where their mouth is, who are willing to make sacrifices on behalf of others, who are willing to make sacrifices on behalf of what they value. And I think everyone in this room, myself included, has a phenomenal opportunity to go out there and do that. So I encourage you, pursue virtue, be humble, model what you expect, do what you say you're going to do. Don't ever take a single day for granted. Enjoy the day that you have been given and do your best at it. Pursue excellence for its own sake. Know your mission and know what you cannot and will not trade off ever. Serve your cause and your team first and put yourself a distant third, and take courage, because you will fail and you will make hard choices and you will get some right and you will get some wrong, but you can and you will persevere. And if we can do these things, I think not only will we make a difference in our communities, in our country, and in the world, as importantly, if not more importantly, we will live a life worth living. And we can end our days with our heads held high and our families proud to bear the name that we leave them. Thank you. I very much appreciate it.